And get started.
Live so that for folks who didn't register, they can also.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'll hand it over to my co-host, Daniella Shaw, and we can get started.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kerri-Ann, for agreeing to do this event. Raising mental health awareness is extremely important in our communities because if we do not deal with a mental health illness ourselves, we probably know someone or who have met someone who has a mental illness. So I think it's really important that we have these discussions to sort of inform each other, educate each other, and come up with ways on how we could continue to connect with each other and help if in the future us or someone else were to have some type of crisis. So with that being said, congratulations again on running for commissioner for the city of Miramar.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational experience in your career training?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks again to everyone who's here with us today. My name is Kerri-Ann, and I'm running for commissioner here in the city of Miramar. I actually went to schools all throughout Miramar. I went to Casa Elementary, so started my kind of K through 6 experience there. And then I went to New Renaissance Middle. I was the first graduating class there. And then I went to Stranahan High and attended FAU, Florida University, where I studied public management, political science, and African American studies. And so got a really well-rounded view of not just the history of our country, disparities that exist for different subgroups of people in our population, but also what it takes to really work towards having a safe and inclusive environment. I was on student government at Florida Atlantic University and championed safety and inclusion initiatives. And that really inspired my work. I think coupled with my educational experience on the disparities that minority groups experience, as well as the work I did on student government, I definitely knew that I wanted to begin working in education and ultimately someday get immersed into government work. And so I worked at local municipalities here in South Florida. I started at the City Hall of Hollywood. I worked with North Springs Improvement District in Coral Springs. Then from there went to the Clinton Foundation and then found my way working directly in education as a tutor for kids in my neighborhood. And then from there, I just knew that education was where I wanted to make a difference. I think uncovering access to quality education was something that for me kind of connected the dots. Like if you had that as the starting point, you like the sky was the limit, right? Like you could use your experience and educational background to then open up doors for yourself and more importantly for others. And so that being said, I think I've always been kind of like a community advocate, whether it was for Habitat for Humanity, volunteering, being class president in high school, again, like I said, student government in college, or just recently, like serving on the Education Advisory Board right here in the city of Miramar, really giving back and working with community members to make a change that's impactful and especially most importantly, measurable so that you can see the progress over time.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. Extremely well-rounded, and I hear you're a community advocate and you're also an amazing leader because that takes a lot of initiative, right? It takes a lot of diligence, a lot of hard work, and a lot of commitment. So, yeah.
For sure. I think the most important thing is you just have to make sure you find something that you're passionate about, because I can be on meetings all day for work and still find the like vigor and passion to open up my next set of books and focus on something community related. And for me, that's what just confirmed this is where my heart is, this is where my passion is. And when you find something that doesn't feel like work, like, you know, God willing, you're blessed to be in that situation, you know, you just have to go all in for it.
Most definitely. You do something you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life, is the saying.
Exactly.
So that is amazing. So Kerri, tell us, what sort of motivated you to take that transition from community advocate, educator to, okay, now I'm going to run for commissioner for the city of Miramar?
Yeah, I think like many folks going through this pandemic and the quarantine, it really forced us to sit still and just uncover, am I living in my purpose? And I knew that everything that I've been doing day to day with working in education, and then afterwards, like once my 9 to 5 was done in the community, it was definitely something aligned with what my purpose is. But then I sat back and said, like, my version of myself 10, 15 years ago definitely had a goal of seeking a position within the community that allowed me to actually affect change, from starting with legislation, so that it's not just who I can actually get directly in touch with through my positions, but how can I do something that empowers broader community? And so for me, during quarantine and being forced to sit still for so long, I was able to kind of look in the mirror and confront that, like, well, why haven't you stepped forward to take on that next step in your career and in your community involvement, to really ensure that you're working to increase access for everyone to live their best life and thrive in the very city that I call my own. I am a third generation Miramarian. And so my grandma lived here, my mom lives here, I live here and own a home here, and hopefully my sister, who I think is on this Zoom, will do the very same thing. But when I think about that and how much our city has changed, it's grown exponentially. Diversity has increased, our geographical limits have increased. I remember when, like, Miramar ended right there on Palm and Miramar Parkway, and like, this was West Miramar, and now it's almost quadrupled in size, right? But as our city prospers and grows, is that actually being felt equally throughout the entire city? Like, are we seeing that ability to thrive, the ability to prosper being felt throughout the entire city? And so for me, it's really about focusing on the long-term sustainability of our city, making sure that the next generation, the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth generation of Miramarians, have a place that they can call home. And that includes things like affordable housing, making sure that we assess the growth of our city to ensure that traffic doesn't just increase and you're sitting at a red light for like 15 minutes. And I think most importantly, with the growth and diversity of our city, making sure it's actually inclusive, right? Like, you can have a very diverse group of people in one setting, but if it's not inclusive and people feel like they're welcomed and can truly be their authentic selves on a day-to-day basis, then you just got diversity without the equity and the inclusion, which is most important for people to feel like this is their home.
Definitely. Very powerful. And it sounds like you really did a journey of self-reflection and self-discovery. Look at you.
Yeah, for sure.
That's really amazing and powerful, especially to do it at a time of isolation, and a pandemic and civil unrest. That takes a lot of courage. Yeah, to sit down and search within yourself and say, okay, what can I do in this moment to make the city better for not only me, but our future, right?
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
And with all those amazing goals and that amazing vision, how do you sort of encapsulate that? Like, what are your main priorities if you were to be elected for city commissioner?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I could speak forever about my priorities, but I think if I had to really narrow them down, the most important thing, like I said, I've been working in education for a long time. And so while I served on the Education Advisory Board in the city of Miramar, I led efforts to raise thousands of dollars for scholarships for local students. And for me, I was able to uncover, from speaking directly to students and school leaders right here in the city, what some of those gaps are to ensure that our kids have access to higher education, whether it's going to a 2-year, 4-year university or college, or going to trade school, right? Like, we know that there need to be multiple options for our youth to find that path for themselves. And so increasing access to quality education by providing scholarships. So we raised thousands of dollars on the Education Advisory Board. Now imagine if we're able to leverage the City Commission and different businesses and organizations throughout the city to really make it a robust and large, opportunity for people to involve themselves and donate to that scholarship fund. It would be immense, right? The impact for youth. And they would then see the city as a place that wants them to thrive and come back and bring their disposable income when they get their first career right here to our city. I think the other thing is definitely, like you mentioned, civil unrest in our country and seeing the things with regard to systemic racism. So I think one of the root causes is really ensuring that we're reimagining our public safety. Like, are making sure that the bad apples in our police department don't actually become the representation of our police department, and that we're doing things to ensure that our city remains safe. I think the other thing is, like, neighboring cities, you often hear they have like boil water effects going on, and you have to be like wondering, is the tap water clean and like safe for me to drink? And our city is actually doing some amazing things to ensure that that stays a top priority. So we should be increasing transparency and letting folks know, like, these are the things we're investing in, these are the things that are happening day to day, and not have it be like the secret where you only find out about it if you're a geek like me and constantly on the city website looking for this information. So reimagining public safety, increasing access to scholarships, and then I think overall, just like I had said before, foster inclusive practices. You know, one of the things is we often have tons of cultural events throughout the city for specific months, but what about having like a multicultural event where you get to actually see multiple different cultures showcased in one space, so that, you know, different communities get access to understand, like, this is what my culture means, and then what that means for having people feel comfortable coming to the table and having a discussion about what challenges they might be facing as a subgroup in our city, so that our solutions are community-led and inclusive of everyone.
Definitely.
That's my very summarized view, even though that probably still took me 10 minutes to talk about.
And I'm glad you spoke about it, because it's amazing. You know, youth scholarships, education, that is extremely important, because the youth are our future. They're the leaders of tomorrow. So it's very important that we lead them up and we train them up in the ways that we properly want them to go, instead of waiting until they become young adults and middle-aged adults, and it's a little bit harder to shift. Public safety, extremely important. That's probably like one of the number one, you know, priority.
Sure.
Definitely. And then that diversity, I love your multicultural vision, because it's almost like diversity will be learned. Like, it won't be a mandated workshop or class. You'll be with people. You'll see the different cultures. They'll teach you about their food, you know, their style of dress, everything like that. So it's almost like you're learning because they're your neighbors, and everyone will automatically be included, so to speak, the more you have those multicultural events. So,
yeah. And I mean, you often hear people say, you know, like, I had no idea that this was going on. I had no idea that there were people who are my actual neighbors that had this lived experience that's so drastically different than mine. And if we create those pathways, those opportunities, and those channels for us to come together and have discussions, like, even something as simple as ongoing town halls and community forums, those should be things that happen regularly, even if we're not in the middle of a pandemic. And so we see a lot of them happening now virtually, which is phenomenal, and it's increased access for some of our community members to actually be able to attend more events that the city are facilitating and hosting. But having those be a normal thing, right? Like, we shouldn't, again, like I said, be guessing about what's going on. It should be a newsletter that comes into the mail, or something like an email that gets sent out to everyone to say, like, hey, these are the things coming up. We want your input. Your voice matters. Come and participate, you know?
Exactly. Because it certainly takes a community. We have representatives in our community, and it also takes the residents to make the community whole and to make everyone feel included. So.
Exactly. Well, Daniella, you've been asking me a lot of questions. I definitely wanted to ask you some too before we dive into some tools and practical things to raise mental health awareness. And so you are our resident expert on the campaign about all things socio-emotional health-wise, and we thank you for that. And so my question for you is, one, just like, tell us a little bit about your background and what made you decide to get into social work.
Definitely. Thank you first and foremost for allowing me to be here and be an expert. It's truly an honor. My background, similar to yours, I was raised in Miami Gardens, very close to Miramar. Went to school in Broward County all my life because my mom wanted me in schools in Broward County, you know, because the norm back then in the 90s was Broward County had better schools. So she wanted to keep me in schools in Broward County. Growing up in a lower income household, if you will, and seeing how we didn't have like access to certain community events, certain healthcare, certain libraries, and certain financial resources, I used to always say to myself, you know, this can't be it. This can't be life. There has to be something more, something better. And growing up, I also always had a passion to help children and families and the brokenhearted, right? Always wanted to help them rise up and be successful and remind them that you can overcome challenges and barriers, you know? So once I graduated from high school and started college, and learn more about sociology and psychology and African American studies and economics. I originally wanted to be a lawyer, funny story.
I remember.
A family court lawyer, worked in a few law offices, and I was like, Daniella, this is not for you. And then finally I realized that my career was more social work driven, because everything that I was doing was community development, working with the mind, working with the life skills, and actually changing people's paths if they wanted their paths to be changed, you know, kind of working with them and building a therapeutic alliance. So that's sort of in a nutshell what drew me into social work.
That's awesome. From your perspective, what's the biggest challenge or obstacle to addressing mental health? And I actually want to dive in a little bit deeper. Let's talk specifically about minority communities, because that's often those communities that I think don't really prioritize or make the connection of the importance of prioritizing mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that answer is probably three main reasons. The first I will say is definitely lack of funding. When it comes to mental health treatment, private mental health treatment, per week, it could be relatively costly. You know, if you see a private therapist, that could run you anywhere from $50 to $100 per session. Now, there are community mental health clinics, and with those community mental health clinics, there's sometimes a waiting list. And you have to meet, you know, economic requirements, meaning your income has to be at a certain level, and it's usually pretty close to the poverty line. So kind of the second barrier, because it's like, okay, am I able to buy dinner this month for the household, or do I invest that money into 4 therapy sessions? So people are kind of having to pick and choose. Another reason is sort of lack of trust with mental health, with the minority communities. That's probably a big piece of it, because a lot of minority experience with mental health is sometimes when they're Baker acted at the hospital after they're in a crisis, or young minority males being put on medication for ADHD because they're acting up in school. So some of them, they learn, you know, not to trust counselors, because if I trust my counselor, I'm gonna have to be on medication, so on and so forth. And then I think religion and spirituality plays a major piece in that as well, because culturally speaking, a lot of times religion teaches us that, you know, God is our healer. He protects our mind. We don't need a therapist. We have God, you know, we have to pray, so on and so forth. And not to say that that's not true, because, you know, I certainly do believe that. And God also gives us counselors. He also gives us therapists, just like he gives doctors and teachers, right? So I think a lot of the lack of trust, the religious beliefs, as far as counseling and therapy, and then the lack of funding, those are probably the 3 big issues when it comes to prioritizing mental health.
And it sounds like all 3 of those combined together is like the perfect storm, right? It then allows people to kind of get this feeling of, I've got this uphill battle and I can't even begin to chip away at one of those 3 barriers. So I'm just gonna, you know, go with the flow and just deal with this on my own, you know?
And a lot of us are doing that, sort of riding the wave, if you will, because that's what they saw their parents do and their parents do. Yeah. So that's the norm in minority. You just deal with it. You know? And we're starting to see now how a lot of that kind of rears its ugly head, because we have a lot more of us being diagnosed with mental illnesses in this way.
I think what's one thing to highlight, you know, and not that he's endorsed me, but Charlemagne the God, the radio host, I think he's made tons, and granted, I know there are so many people in this space who have been sounding the alarm for a long time, but he's a really phenomenal example. And for those who don't know, he's one of the co-hosts on The Breakfast Club, which is like a hugely syndicated talk radio show. But he's really done amazing work using his platform to position the importance for mental health, especially for minority communities. And he very regularly will post free resources or different places where you can go to tap into like discounted services to ensure that he's just letting people know like it's important. Don't just kind of brush things under the rug. And also there are resources out there for you to access and make sure that you prioritize.
Yes, yeah. And he has a new podcast out too, I think, as far as like men's mental health. So yeah.
I think I don't know if it's his podcast or like a new podcast network that he's actually uplifting the voices of people in minority communities, which includes some folks, like I had said, who are already doing the work and have podcasts and things to talk about addressing mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'll hand it back over to you to just talk a little bit about some statistics about mental health awareness, and then we can dive into some more tangible things about like resources and things like that before we wrap up today.
Of course. Thank you so much. So just to give a few statistics, just to kind of make everyone aware of the prevalence of mental illness on a national scale, not only in our community, but the National Alliance on Mental Illness, also known as NAMI, according to them, 1 in 5 adults are currently living with a mental illness. And that's a pretty high number, 1 in 5. And of those 1 in 5, about 60% of people who are diagnosed with a mental illness, they did not receive any mental health services within the last year. Right? So understand, in mental illnesses such as like depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia disorder, some people may have these illnesses and they may not be diagnosed because they haven't gone to a psychiatrist, haven't gone to a therapist, haven't been hospitalized. Yeah. So they're living with undiagnosed illnesses, right? And I also want everyone to understand that 1 in half of all the major mental illnesses, you're usually diagnosed by adolescence, or you usually have onset by adolescence. Mm-hmm. So by the time you're 14 or 15, generally speaking, you'll have your first episode of depression or anxiety or bipolar, right? And when you're talking about more serious mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and PTSD, that usually is diagnosed by the age of 24. Mm. So, and in older age, you have some other illnesses, but with the more common ones like depression and anxiety and bipolar and schizophrenia, that's usually by your early 20s, you're going to have your first onset, right? It's pretty.
Let me ask you a quick question. Sorry to interrupt. How can folks tell the difference between like something really bad happened today, I'm feeling really down and out, and lasts for maybe 2 to 3 days, tops a week, right? Mm-hmm. Is there a difference between that feeling and an official diagnosis of depression or anxiety?
Yes, there is. And it is very subjective. So I'm speaking generally when I speak. Right? Generally with depression, you have those feelings for at least 2 weeks, and it's consistent. Gotcha. For 2 weeks, for up to 3 to 6 months when you're having depression. And there's usually a wide range of symptoms. So it's not only, you're feeling lethargic, you're oversleeping, but you're also overeating, or you're not eating at all. Mm-hmm. You don't want to go out with friends. You're kind of isolated. You're withdrawn, staying in the house. You're feeling kind of worthless, helpless, not seeing the point. You may be feeling like a burden, You'll probably have some pretty bad difficulties concentrating and focusing, Sometimes you might hear people say, like, my brain is fuzzy, or my brain is cloudy, I can't really think right now. Because depression, in a sense, to paint a picture, it's like this big gray cloud that kind of walks with you everywhere you go. So when a person is depressed, they're not only depressed at work or at home or at school or at the gym, they're depressed everywhere they go.
Yeah.
Because the cloud follows you everywhere. You get what I'm saying?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think we've all seen commercials, right? Where like it's about a medication, and I don't know much about like the do's and don'ts of that side of it, but we've all seen those commercials where like the cloud is following the one person, and it's interesting to hear you say like that truly is what it could feel like.
Yes, I have to paint the picture, because I think sometimes what we do without realizing it, and this is one of the things I want to talk about, is a lot of times when our friends, family, and loved ones, when they say, you know, I'm feeling depressed, or I'm a little bit in a depressed mood, a lot of times people think they're helping, and they'll make comments like, well, why are you depressed? You know, you're so beautiful. You have a nice body. You're so successful. Your children love you. You have a great marriage. And it's like, all of those things don't take away from the fact that the person is depressed, you know, because it's an internal type of thing, regardless of what's happening in your environment. It's mental. There's a lot of memories, you know, there may be some trauma there, you know, some distressing events. It's how you see yourself. So someone tells you that they're depressed, listen, please listen. You know, just say, how can I help you in this moment? Learn to listen here, you know, because one main thing that a lot of people with depression tend to say, especially those who are like on the suicidal spectrum, wanting to harm themselves, wanting to take their life, not seeing any purpose, not seeing the point in life, is that they feel like no one understands them, feel like they don't have anyone to talk to, and they feel misunderstood. And Kerri, like, could you imagine feeling misunderstood by your family, by your friends, by your loved ones, your coworkers? And on top,
I know how I feel when I'm just trying to explain something and people don't understand me. And so imagining that feeling and that like sense of anxiety, right, over a longer period of time, it can be crippling, isolating.
Very crippling, very isolating, right? So, and I think too, and then with the anxiety, that's also another element. And anxiety is more so the intense fear, the worry, the doubt, the ruminating. It's kind of that what if. Your mind is in this constant state of danger, you know, and you're constantly trying to control every element of the environment to prevent against the danger. And sometimes there is no danger. It's just your mind telling you that there's danger, because that's the anxiety talking, right? And a lot of perfectionists, right, tend to have an element of anxiety, and that's how they're able to do their work so well, you know?
So, yeah, I think I know exactly what you're talking about. I will very candidly share that is definitely me. Like, I am a perfectionist in the sense of everything, even today, leading up to this event, right? Like the idea of trying to perfect my day to ensure that this was a successful event, and the anxiety that I felt leading up to this event, to the point where I'm like telling family and friends, hey, don't talk to me the entire hour before, because I need to make sure my internet is working and all of these things. And in many ways, it is a very phenomenal character trait to have, especially in the professional world, right? Like, to be that perfectionist, you often get a pat on the back. It's like, wow, you've thought through every single thing. You've done some productive paranoia. And so you're really making sure that you dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, right? But some of the things that come with that kind of like internalized burden, so to speak, or internalized necessity, is your mind is just constantly going, right? You're constantly thinking about, did I dot all my I's? Did I cross all my T's? And then you're on edge. And then what that translates into is like, I'm snippy. I'm short with family and friends, and they're just trying to help. They're just trying to be resourceful and, you know, making sure that they check in and call. And I might answer and say, I don't have time for this. Like, what? I'm trying to dot all my I's and cross all my T's. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'm sure my sister who's on this call is probably like, oh my gosh, yes, she does do that. But it's just, I loved the fact that I heard you say what it might appear as on the outside to people who are external is, oh, you're just a perfectionist, and or insert another stereotype or word to categorize the person or what they're doing, when on the inside, it actually is like, I'm not a perfectionist because I forgot that one thing. And because I forgot that one thing, I've actually failed today. And so why even start tomorrow? Because like it all crumbled because I forgot to dot that one I, you know? And I think one thing I also want to name, I know you're about to get to this, but someone mentioned it in the chat. Diane, thank you for flagging. We were definitely going to name this, but today is also World Suicide Prevention Day. And I think that's one of the main and important reasons why Daniella and I chose today to have this event, is to actually highlight the fact that mental health, people often hear that and think of the stigmas related to, oh, that means that you're not a whole person. There's a flaw with you, right? And in all actuality, it could be your mother, it could be your sister, it could be your best friend, it could even be, you know, your boss at work who's struggling to just keep it all together. And especially now more so, given all the things that are forced on our plate, given the pandemic, given the racial uprisings, given the continual injustices that we see day to day on TV, you know? And it's not just national, it's statewide and it's citywide right here in our community, you know?
It is, yeah. Thank you so much for caring. And I validate you. Thank you for being so transparent and expressive. And
of course.
It's okay. Let that anxiety motivate you, prepare you, and continue to allow you to do amazing work. We need it, you know, we really do. And also what I'll do is I'll put in the chat the number for the National Suicide Prevention Line, so everyone could have it, and also for the 211 crisis line, because if you are having a crisis, or if you have a family member or friend who is experiencing a crisis, and you'll know because they're not behaving like themselves, they're acting very reckless, they may be using drugs more, drinking more, driving erratically, saying they don't want to be here, they don't see the point. They may have these intense mood swings, you know, or intense anger and irritability and rage. It's important to either ask how you can help or connect them with someone who could help them, right? Because all it takes is one phone call and you could possibly save a life. So I'll make sure to put that information in the chat. And Kerri-Ann, in regards to you, I'm curious. How are you managing that anxiety? Like, how are you turning that stress into good stress? Because there is good stress. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for asking. I think one of the first things that I'll say is that family and friends, right? Like, I think now more than ever, running for office as well as managing all the things, family and friends have become even more so important, right? I think like having your community that you can lean on is something that was always important in my life, but even now more so, dealing with the ups and downs of being a candidate and like, okay, great, things went according to plan. All right, things did not go so according to plan. Having that ability to confide in folks. I mean, I've even reached out to you to say like, today it was really hard, you know, and having people to, one, keep me grounded and remind me that like, candidate Kerri-Ann, who may have experienced XYZ today, is different from the Kerri-Ann that they know and that they've watched grow and become the woman that I am today. And so that is so powerful, you know, and I think one of the number one levers that I have in my back pocket on a day-to-day basis. And then the second thing I think is a little bit different, but I have been using the Calm app very frequently. And so whether it's listening to a playlist on the app or doing some of their like nighttime meditations to go to bed, they actually make a huge difference in my day-to-day. And I find when I don't use the app to go to sleep or to just listen to a playlist or even a bedtime story, which is really great. I didn't think I'd like bedtime stories, but they work. And before I know it, I wake up and I'm like, I didn't finish the story. I fell asleep. But that has been extremely helpful for me with regard to channeling the energy that kind of just can continue to make me stir about crazy into something and releasing it. And then the last thing is just exercising, like walking my dog every single day has been very powerful because she'll remind me if I forget to take her on a long walk. She'll come and literally like stand up and be like, hey, I need to go. And it's also just a reminder for a mental break to just step away and clear my mind and breathe some fresh air.
Definitely. Well, look at you with your coping skills, right? That's what we call coping skills. So you're managing very well. Yes. And the Calm app, amazing. If you are someone who has all these, ruminating thoughts. Your mind is currently racing. You're constantly thinking about what you have to do. Your body is relatively tense, and you're having difficulty focusing. The Calm app really, really helps you recenter yourself and become refocused. And if you don't want to use the Calm app, maybe a few moments, meditating or praying, even if it's just 5 minutes, stepping away from your desk or stepping outside, looking at nature, looking at the trees, looking at the clouds, and actually paying attention actually helps you have a sense of calm. And it reminds you that, okay, Kerri-Ann, I'm safe. I'm safe right now. There's no danger.
Yeah.
In this moment, I am safe, right?
For sure.
Most definitely.
I will name very candidly, I have always been that person that's like, meditation is just not for me. Like, it doesn't do anything for me. And I think without the app, I probably would still feel that way. But with the app, because I have like guided practice, and I'm not just sitting there like, okay, I've been sitting here for 5 minutes and I still feel the same. I think if you're someone who's historically felt that way, finding something to help guide you through that practice, or like we said, like even just going for a walk, that might be your way to meditate and just break away for a little bit.
Definitely. And you have to do what works for you. That's what I want everyone to remember. What works for Kerri-Ann may not work for Alicia, may not work for Ashley, may not work for Diane, right? So the key is to find out what specifically works for you, and you won't know it works until you try it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be an element of willing to try new things, willing to learn. And then once you're able to sort of relearn things, that's when you're able to effectively code, right? So Kerri-Ann, in addition to everything else you've mentioned, what would you say has been one of the biggest challenges in this season for you?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we're keeping it real, so I'll be really real. I think one of the biggest challenges for me so far has been reminding myself to be steady. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So like, I'll have a really great conversation with someone and I'm like at the top of the roller coaster right before it falls. And I'm like, it's such a great view up here. Everything looks so awesome. And then I'll have a conversation with someone else and, feel like, oh, okay, maybe they're not so supportive about my candidacy. And then I'm like, just like falling down into the like little peak before we go back up, right? And so I think for me, remembering kind of like what I alluded to earlier of like, there's a candidate version of myself, and then there's the person that I know who I am, right? Regardless of like what someone's strong opinion is about my priorities or my policies and what I want to do for the city. I think that's been the most challenging, is just remembering like there are two different versions, and like you have to remember to turn off the same way that like we try to prioritize turning off work and like having personal time. It's that same thing, right? Like, all right, I've turned off work, I'm turning on campaign mode. Now I've got to turn off campaign mode and still prioritize that personal time,
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. And I'm so glad too, Kerri, that you mentioned like the emotional roller coaster, so to speak. It happens. Yeah. It happens, especially all those different things on your plate. And those positive supports that you have are extremely important. And I encourage every single person listening, if you feel you don't have positive supports, try and seek them out or try and build on them, because you're going to have people that support you unconditionally, no matter what you do. They're always going to offer, insight. They're always going to motivate you. They're always going to be your biggest cheerleader. And then you're going to have other people that you thought would support you. Mm-hmm. In different seasons, they're not. And that's okay. Focus on the ones who are supporting you, because the ones who are supporting you are going to help you continue to rise up, continue to elevate. They're not going to judge you when you're being a perfectionist. They're not going to judge you when you're stressed out. And they're going to be in a major part of your life transition. So positive supports really make a huge difference in your life. So I encourage everyone, seek them out, keep them close.
Yeah. And Christina Austin Valera also chatted. Another great app besides Calm is Headspace. Yes. So that's also another great one in case, that's your preference.
Thank you, Christina. Okay. Now, Kerri, I also want to ask, especially if you're a person that kind of because you have a heart for the community and you love helping and you're an advocate, right? And you're a leader, we both have similar values. Mm-hmm. How would you encourage people of the community, fellow residents? How do you encourage them to manage their stress when it comes to, the political climate and what they're seeing on social media these days?
Yeah. Listen, I've had to tell myself to put my phone down over the past few months, right? And you start typing something and you're like, what is this worth it? Like, what am I going to benefit from once I send this, besides potentially have 10 more things to respond to? I think first and foremost, that's a really good question. And I struggle with it myself on an ongoing basis, because as much as you don't want to continually consume news, especially political news, there's still something about it that draws you to it, and you want to know, you want to hear what the most ridiculous thing is that happened today, right? And I think for me, some of what I just said, right? Like understanding that you've got to set those boundaries. You've got to say to yourself, all right, and I think I've been doing this actually on my phone lately, is those app limits. So once you've kind of used a certain app for a certain amount of hours or even minutes, it tells you you've reached your limit for today. And I think doing stuff like that so that you avoid the continual scroll, the continual refresh to see what have these people said, what news articles have been released, and what are people's opinions on it for me to then share my own. It's not that those things are bad and you should, stay away from them. I think that political banter is always something that's going to be interesting and fun, especially if you care about the topic, right? But setting those limits and those boundaries so that you're not consuming it 24/7, because I think that can lead down a path where you start to see things that back up what you want to be true versus looking at things objectively is one thing. And then I think the other thing is, the same way I just said that about the app limits on the phone from a technological standpoint, making sure that you're also doing that in person. And so if you have a friend who's constantly talking about politics, constantly talking about the negative thing that just occurred and how people are crazy and all these things, first, remind them of your boundaries and be pretty upfront and honest and say hey, I'm just not in the mood. I don't want to talk about that today. And if they're truly your friend who cares about, again, raising mental health awareness and prioritizing your health, they should respect that, right? And if they're at a place where they're not, or they're pushing back and saying that just means you probably didn't read the news article, or you don't have an opinion because you don't know what you're talking about, then maybe you need to put a limit on the amount of conversations you have with those people, even if it is family or close friends, because again, it's about prioritizing what will give you sanity and allow you to rest peacefully day to day and night to night.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. Great points, Kerri-Ann. And especially when you're talking about cultural norms and values, a lot of times we're taught that if it's a family member, if it's a close friend, we have to take the emotional banter, and we don't. If they're violating your boundaries, so to speak, and they're violating them because you feel some discomfort, you feel uncomfortable, you might feel angry, you might feel sad, or you just might feel emotionally drained whenever you talk to them. But whenever they come around, your spirit is just if that is happening, you have to set some firm boundaries and not engage, in conversations with certain people. And it's okay to do that. Try not to feel guilty if you have to do that, because who's responsible for our mental health? Is it our friends and family, or is it us?
It's yourself.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. You're responsible for your mental health. So if you're having these political discussions online and in person, and it's creating all these intense emotions and confusion and anger, and you're questioning if you even want that person to be a friend or family member, you have to really take a step back and maintain your boundaries, right? Because it shouldn't be getting that far.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And what would you say, Kerri, in this season to anyone who wants to run for local office?
I would say do it. Don't even second guess. Like, do what you need to do, put in the paperwork and run. And I think for me, obviously the goal is to win. The goal is to make sure that my priorities and my vision for what long-term sustainable city like Miramar can accomplish with a new fresh perspective on leadership uh, will actually occur come March 2021. But I think the number one thing that I would actually say to folks who are considering running for office is it might feel an uphill battle. You won't have all the answers to all the questions on day one when you're deciding to run, but there are so many phenomenal resources out there. And the most important thing is don't be afraid to reach out to someone whose career you've been like watching or monitoring and aspire to kind of like follow in their footsteps. Because even with me reaching out to people who I've admired for years, they've been so welcoming, like, oh, let me connect you to this person, let me make sure that you're set up for success in this way. And so as much as, like I said, there is that roller coaster feeling and like there are so many ups and downs and you've got to make sure you've got your team so you feel grounded the entire time, I've also learned so much about myself in such a short amount of time with regard to my morals and what are the things that I actually will never waver on, right? Because you'll be tested to uncover, do I actually believe in this? And do I actually want to stand by this as a principle? And I'm thankful that, yes, I still stand by all the things that I sought out for when I first announced my candidacy, but it's going to be challenging. But like with any other challenge that you go through in life, whether it's professionally or personally, you come out stronger, you come out wiser. And I think the most important thing for me, especially as a woman of color, is that you come out with tools and resources and lessons learned to then share with the next generation, the next person who wants to do this. And so regardless of success or not, I feel like I am learning so much to then pass on to someone else so they don't have to reinvent the wheel the way that I did.
Most definitely. Thank you. So motivational and inspiring. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Of course. And I think like you hit it on the head. Most important thing is to actually use your voice and reach out. And that's something I had to learn in this season too. You don't have to do everything by yourself. You don't have to be independent. You're not meant to walk this journey alone. There are people around who can help you. Reach out. Some are meant to help, and some aren't. But the key is to actually reach out and see what help you can get, like you've done in this, like I've done, and I'm sure a lot of people listening has done as well. Reach out for help and use your voice, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I will say, I will plug to everyone who's on the event listening, either on Facebook or on Zoom, reach out to me and volunteer for the campaign and help out. And most importantly, we have to be realistic here too. Donate, please. Like, it takes also not just grit and determination, but it also takes the financial backing and support of community members, a grassroots movement, right? So that we can make our vision successful. We can actually make sure that our message is heard by everyone throughout the city and locally, so that they understand that there is someone who's thinking about inclusive practices for our city. There is someone who's trying to prioritize, reimagining what public safety looks like in our city. And most importantly, looking to ensure that there is access to quality education for the next generation of Miramarians right here in our city. So Kerri-Ann.com, sign up to volunteer, and please donate what you can today.
Perfect. Thank you, Kerri. And to everyone listening, I'm going to put in the chat, I'm going to put the number for the suicide prevention line, and I'm also going to say it for those who can't see the chat. So the National Suicide Prevention Line number is 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 1-800-273-8255. They have trained crisis workers who will answer your phone call, ask you questions, and then they'll be able to get you connected with services. If for any reason you're not comfortable calling, you can text 741-741. and you would text TALK, T-A-L-K, to 741-741. If you're interested in just local mental health resources in Broward County, the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Broward County, their number is 954-316-9907. Again, that's 954-316-9907. And then you can also dial 211 if you have any general questions about healthcare, financial resources, housing resources, things like that in your community. They go according to your zip code. So I just thought it would be very important if you guys had those resources. Of course, you're more than welcome. Okay.
I just chatted all of those to the Zoom.
Thank you.
So I tracked all of it while you were talking. I think we have someone manning the Facebook, so if you could also share that on the Facebook side, that would be helpful. And then we'll also just post all of this in a post on the Facebook page, as well as send an email to people who registered so that you can have it in one space.
Of course, most definitely. And if you guys have any questions for me about the mental health side, I'm always available. I'll give you guys my website. It's peaceatlastcounseling.com. So it's all one word. And I'll type it on here for you. So it's peaceatlastcounseling.com. And we also have a community organization, a nonprofit organization that Kerri-Ann has also been an amazing leader for. It's called the Mental Exchange. And that's mentalexchange.org. And we service all of South Florida, located in Broward County. And one of our main roles is to bring together community leaders and raise awareness for our minority communities. Because Kerri-Ann, I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I don't remember having these events to look forward to as far as mental health awareness and, you know, seeing people who look like us running for office, doctors, lawyers, those types of things. So we're really trying to bring everyone together and be the voice for our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. I think there was definitely an increased stigma when we were younger related to these. I did want to go ahead and open up the floor for any questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to chat them now into the chat, and we will go ahead and address them. So whether you're on Facebook or you're in the Zoom, if you have any questions, feel free to chat them, and then we'll definitely read them out loud and get any responses.
Yes. Use your voice. We love questions.
Yes. But yeah, to your point, Daniella, no, I think there was just an increased stigma related to speaking about something that, you know, typically is just like it stays between the family or it stays between that close network of folks.
Yeah. And one other thing I do want to mention is those difficult family discussions, when you're ready, have them, right? Because if we do not talk about certain things, society will talk about it for us. So somehow, some way, people are going to learn culture. They're going to learn from social media. They're going to learn from their friends, and they're going to learn from what they experience. And I know a lot of times when you're talking about mental health, it's like taboo. You know, don't say you feel sad. Don't say you feel depressed. Don't say you're having trouble coping. You know, don't say you're feeling weak or you're defeated. Because when you say those things, it's like you're not supposed to say that. You have to always be strong. You have to continue fighting. You're a warrior, all these things. And people get tired. It's okay to feel tired, you know? Where can people seek help when you have a relative with a mental issue instead of calling the police when they are in crisis? You can, if they're in a suicidal crisis, meaning they're threatening to harm themselves or someone else, or if they're behaving violently, or if they're hallucinating, seeing things, hearing things you're not seeing or hearing, you can call the suicide hotline and they'll be able to help. You can also call 911 and ask for the crisis intervention team, and they'll bring the police along with the crisis intervention counselor. 211 also helps to walk you through crisis as well. So that may help. If those things still don't work out, of course, you're welcome. And Deborah, and also to add, if they're threatening to harm themselves, you may want to make sure you remove anything lethal from the home. So that's like weapons, sharp objects, pills, anything that they could use to potentially harm themselves, you may want to remove it from the home or out of their access.
Yeah, I think that's such an important question from Deborah. Thank you again for asking, because a lot of the police reform movements that we see coming about are actually talking about how when people call 911 for someone who's having a mental health issue, it often does not end well, right? And unfortunately, those statistics are pretty high as well. And so I think that's another thing too to prioritize in our communities, is like ensuring that those resources stay and actually increase for people who are struggling with mental health, so that we aren't looking for the police to come and handle something which may end up negative, and not what the person who called for help intended to happen, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions or thoughts before we wrap up today? Okay, looks like looks like someone does have another question or thought.
Yes. Let's see. Where is it? Right into what other materials do you read or listen to for mental health? Kerri, you want to answer first, then I'll answer?
Yeah, I love podcasts. And so I think, to your point, Daniela, earlier, of like breaking away and allowing yourself to just have time to, you know, understand that you need that mental break sometimes to then be able to show up as your best self. And so for me, definitely prioritizing listening to a good podcast so that I can, get caught up on topics that are important to me that are not work or campaign related. And then I think the other thing is reading, like articles online that are related to health and fitness, as well as things that are not necessarily always political, to just get my mind outside of the day to day. How about you? What do you read or listen to?
Yes, well, most definitely music is something I listen to a lot, because I'm very creative, artistry type vibe. So neo soul, old school music, anything with a lot of soft violins, jazz, tambourines, because the music really has a soothing type of thing in your spirit. Gospel music, anything that's very slow with a nice tone, it really helps you be in a calm state, which we need because there's a lot of chaos going on. So if you're able to keep yourself centered and focused, that helps. And as far as material, yes, please be sure to feed and nourish your soul with positivity. I can't stress that enough. Online, there's a lot of graphic things. You don't want to keep taking that in day to day, because you may not realize it, but your brain records those images and they may not replay now. Who's to say they won't replay in the future, right? So if your timeline tends to be very down and you feel exhausted, try and follow more, like there's DBT thought for the day, there's positive quotes, there's inspirational quotes. If you have any faith beliefs, maybe follow some of your faith-based leaders, and you want to nourish your soul with positivity, right? Motivational, inspirational quotes and books help a lot as well. So music, podcasts, books, articles, right, Kerri?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here with us today. The other thing I'll say is we do have another event coming up in a couple of weeks. We'll share that link for folks to register. It's about battling COVID-19. I think we've seen the numbers decrease over time, but what we do need to keep in mind is that there's still a pandemic going on out there, and we need to prioritize understanding what we need to continue to do as a community to combat that pandemic. And I think it ties in really well with what we talked about today with regard to mental health awareness, and just making sure that as much as you're focusing on your mental health, you're also focusing on the physical, not just for you, but your loved ones and the broader community. So you can go to kerriannesbeth.com/events, and you'll see information there about our upcoming event on battling COVID-19 here in Broward County, and especially in Miramar. So with that being said, thank you all so much. Appreciate your time. And be sure to share the recording, especially on Facebook, with your family and friends. I think we had some very fruitful and meaningful discussion today. Thank you so much, Daniella.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for having me. And thank you so much to all of our listeners. We value you. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Bye.
Bye-bye.